Thank you, Dr. Schopf, and we do have a couple of minutes here for questions.
Sure.
And, sorry, yeah, could you introduce yourself for the benefit of the camera, and then maybe you could repeat
the question.
Envision qualitative differences in data and how they would be treated?
Even better.
Do you want me to repeat?
Go ahead.
So I was just wondering if in going through this whole process, you've envisioned qualitatively different data sets and how they would be treated structurally within this sort of sharing context. Kind of what I'm thinking of is that in climate science, what you're really interested in a lot of times is time series and historical data and looking at those trends and modeling. But there may be other areas where there is historical data, but it's not as meaningful as the more modern and more accurate data. Right. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about.
Thank you. I appreciate your question. So a lot of the examples that I gave are climate science or geoscience based because my most recent scientific appointment was with the Woods Oceanographic, and this was a client data meeting, so I wanted to try to pull those. I have worked with biologists, high energy physicists, chemists. I was part of the UKE social science program when I lived in Edinburgh. I think a lot of the data issues I mentioned cross fields quite easily. Climate and geoscience in some ways have it a little bit easy because almost all of their data involves some three-dimensional place, a time, and then a value. And in fact, that was one of the cornerstones when we started talking about EarthCube, which is a large NSF geoscience cyber infrastructure project looking at data issues. We tried to, at one point we talked about limiting, the data in that space was any data that was a three-dimensional space, a time, and a value. I think that actually got eased because, you can always come up with counterexamples. But I think the nature of the data and the structure of it is less important than how you think about it at a higher level. So I do think that this is relevant to other fields. You've always got to come up with what works for you, of course. There's a question back here.
Hi, Tat Slawecki from Limnotech. I enjoyed your talk. There was one comment that I had, though. You had the slide comparing software development and database or data development, and something struck me as missing from the top of the software development, that's specification. And I think that that's a reality of academic and actually more programming than even consultants care to admit. You just start doing it. But that came to mind because I saw you lining up QA/QC with bug fixes. And to me, the quality assurance is something that happens actually before. And so when I saw QA/QC down at the bottom, that seemed a little wrong. QA to me happens sooner, but maybe that's getting into religious discussions.
No, I agree with you entirely. And I've had some wonderful conversations with people. So it turns out that ISO has a standard for software engineering, and it has 7 stages to it for how you develop software. And it starts off with this lovely specification and all of these pieces. I've always been in a world where that's a great idea. The same way as I should start writing my grants 90 days before the due date. And I know that supercomputing is coming in November, and I have a really nice experiment that I could run this week, and so I should just do it as opposed to wait for November. I think it actually winds up being a mix. You're right in that I think especially with data, you do have more specification ahead of time because you're designing sensors and such, and you're collecting data or you're simulating data to answer certain questions. And so you do have some of that specification. You do have some of that QA/QC ahead of time, perhaps more than you would in the organic software environment that I worked on. And as with any metaphor, I can chip away at that in spades, and I'd be happy to do that over a pint or so later if you're interested. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.